what do you think about this issue? Because some people would say, oh, this is just a distraction. It's only a few odd police officers that are being distracted by some of these political issues. The main body of police officers are focusing on their difficult job. What do you think? Do you think it is a real problem?
This essentially cuts to the heart of perception, this kind of wearing of badges, taking knees, dancing at events and all of that, because it gains so much traction across social media. And people think, this is what our police are doing. And it does override a lot of the great work that police officers do every day. But the policy exchange report that came out yesterday mirrors what I have been saying and other policing commentators for years, including in this studio on this show many, many times, because it does cut to the heart of public perception, public confidence, and there is most definitely a need to get back to servicing the victims of crime. No matter how small that crime may perceive to be, victims deserve a service. And quite frankly, in many, many cases, they're simply not getting it.
Yeah, and that's true, isn't it? Because if the police were doing this sort of thing, but they were getting more effective at stopping crime, maybe it wouldn't matter so much, because they'd very much, the figures would show that they're still very effective. But the reality is some crimes have been effectively, you know, de facto decriminalised, because if you're burgled, for instance, or if you have your phone, you know, robbed, as, you know, one of our producers did the other day, and the police simply couldn't do much, to be honest.
Well, of course they could have done, but there is stuff they could have done. You can always do stuff to investigate a crime. And if you do eventually come up against a lot of dead ends, then you have to admit that. But the public would like to see those routes, those investigative routes being examined, and they're not. And part of the core problem of this is many years ago, some bright spark in policing who was trying to climb that greasy pole of promotions came up with an expression, screening out. We will screen out particular crimes where they don't feel there's a likelihood of arresting someone. So consequently, when these crimes are screened out, they're done by somebody sitting at a desk, not by a police officer who has taken the trouble actually to do their job, to go out on the ground, to speak to the victim, to speak to neighbours, to see if they saw anything, if they heard anything. You see, and consequently, as we speak now, people will be on the phone being given crime reference numbers for the purposes of insurance. And I can guarantee you that each and every person who gets that crime reference, not only have they become a victim, but they will also be deeply disappointed that they know that nothing is going to be done to investigate their crime.
And Peter, what do you think is driving this? Because, I mean, as we were talking about in the break, you know, public confidence is down in the police, and so it's clearly not the public demanding that the police actually focus on many of these so-called woke issues. When you do see, for example, statistics showing that knife crime, for example, in London is on the rise, other quite serious offences are on the rise. So what would be the rationale? What's the justification for this type of move?
Violent crime is on the rise and detection rates are plummeting. So, of course, the public are quite rightly deeply concerned about this. About 25 years ago, when Tony Blair was repeating his mantra of education, 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 every time there was a microphone inside, certain ambitious senior officers thought, this can apply to us. Let's go and get degrees. And so many of them did. And it became absolutely central to an ambitious cop to have letters after their name as well as in front of them. And what happened was, as all these police officers strode around the corridors of the intelligentsia, they suddenly decided that anything to do with old policing was bad. Some was, but not all. And that they then came into this world quite frankly, being wrapped up in their own perception and their own ideas and thoughts, and a lot, quite frankly, of pseudo-intellectual claptrap. What needs to happen is that, and I echo entirely so much of the report yesterday, there is a need to get back to basics, serve the public, reconfigure policing so that neighbourhood community policing is everywhere, and community engagement will come through investigating crime, not dancing, not face painting, and not other kind of nonsense.
So, Peter, is there the political will for that? Because that seems like a very big ask, even though many people may agree with you that it is the right thing to do. But to really fundamentally reconfigure policing, do you think that there is the political will and determination to really do what it takes to actually get policing back to its core purpose?
Undoubtedly, Priti Patel has been very vocal in criticising so many aspects of what she sees in current policing. And let's face it, she's the Home Secretary. She should be very well informed on these matters. The Robert Peel principles that he laid down nearly 200 years ago make really good reading. And I would urge anybody to go online.
They're actually at the beginning of this report, I think. This report begins with setting out those exact principles.
And they apply today, nearly 200 years later, as much as they did back in 1829. They are really worth a read. And, of course, the ninth principle says that police effectiveness will be measured by the absence of crime and disorder. Well, we can all quite fairly argue, sadly, that perhaps the effectiveness as it is today is not as good as it should be, and that is a shame for the thousands of good cops. I really want policing to get its act together, to rediscover an unfashionable word, discipline. You know, people say I'm a dinosaur. I can hear it on social media now as people type away. Get him off, right? But discipline is a good thing in a service that is essentially about preventing and detecting crime.
Well, if you're not going to have discipline in a police force, I mean, you might as well forget it. I don't see what the point of a police force would be. What would you say to police? Many police officers, I'm sure, would say this, and perhaps members of the opposition would say, well, it's the Conservatives' fault because they've cut policing numbers, they haven't properly invested in the police force, and there are more and more crimes and less funding. What would you say to that?
Firstly, what I would say to the police, the good ones, is thank you. Yeah, a huge thank you on behalf of the public, because so many of them do a great job. Yes, the decade of austerity was catastrophic for policing, you know, and the cuts that were made to their budgets and the cuts to the numbers, not only of police officers, but back office staff. There has, of course, been a pledge to recruit 20,000 new officers, but sadly, as so many come through the front door, many are going out of the back door because they're disillusioned, they feel undervalued and underpaid. These are matters that will have to be addressed. But we have a new commissioner and a new deputy commissioner coming into the Metropolitan Police in the next few days, Sir Mark Rowley and Dame Lynn Owens. Now, they've obviously both bowed in front of royalty. They are part of the establishment, I think people could argue, but will they be there for the people? Will they listen? Will they understand? They are in incredibly influential and powerful positions. They could really create a sea change which is needed, because public confidence is tanking. With every dance, with every face painting, so many people go, what on earth are our police doing?